Start your day with It's the Business. Here's Phil Dobbie.
Today, how green is your pension? Are you sitting on shares that are rewarding companies that are bad for the environment? Do you even know what's in your pension portfolio?
And it's about risk, isn't it? It's about connecting with the incredibly troubling existential question of our survival on the planet. We are in the midst of two crises, a nature crisis, sometimes called a biodiversity crisis, and we are in the midst of a climate crisis. Those two things cannot be ignored.
Environmental journalist Lucy Siegle joins me today, and Joe Biden, he's been out giving his Philadelphia address, building America from the middle class up, not from the top down.
So today, I'm proposing a plan for the nation that rewards work, not just rewards wealth. It builds a fair economy that gives everybody a chance to succeed. And it's going to create the strongest, most resilient, innovative economy in the world.
Well, look at his plan and ask how much of it we should be copying over here. We're getting the jab, but do we have a plan for what happens next? Rishi Sunak wants to cut back on stimulus. Couldn't that be the worst thing to do right now? Oh, and how right were we on Deliveroo yesterday? Not that we like to gloat. Well, okay, just this once. It's Thursday, the 1st of April, 2021. Good morning.
And now, it's the business, making sense of it all with Phil Dobbie.
Yes, maybe Deliveroo should actually have listed on the London Stock Exchange today, because then they could have just said when it all went wrong, look at you, April Fool. It was all a joke. But it wasn't, of course. It was just a fiasco. I'm so glad we talked it down yesterday because they had already downgraded the list price that they're hoping to raise. They were hoping to raise 460 pence per share. In the end, it was offered at 390 pence per share, and it fell 30% below that before clawing back a little bit and closing the day 14% down. But, you know, it could all go careering down again today. I think everyone had the same thought, you know, that we were saying yesterday, that aren't they going to end up paying their drivers a lot more, and isn't that going to ruin their business model? Because low-cost drivers is all they've got. And as I said yesterday, what is the business model really? I mean, what is it they want all that money for? They're just saying they want to do more food deliveries, more non-profit making food deliveries. What if we don't want any more food deliveries? What if we've reached peak food? Maybe we don't want to eat more. We don't want more restaurant meals. We just want to cook more. Actually, I'm sure there is potential for ready-cooked meals, home-cooked meals. You know, if you're looking for an app that brings people together, then what about, you know, not at restaurant prices, maybe something frozen that's made by someone who lives a few streets away, who, you know, when they're cooking something, they do a few extra portions and then sell it on an app. We could, you know, then you'd have people who can cook as well as people, because Deliveroo, they've just got people who can ride a bike. What about people who can cook as well in this sharing economy? I'm surprised there's not something happening that allows us to do that through an app. I guess there is the danger, isn't there? If you get food poisoning, what happens then? We need an eateroo, don't we? Not a Deliveroo. When I do my world famous smoked salmon quiche, I want to share it with the world. It's so good. I want to share it with the world. It's just smoked salmon and a bit of leek and some feta cheese, basically, and a bit of mustard. Mustard's the secret, mixed in with the eggs. Anyway, an app could show when I've done that, when it's available. I'd get ratings based on my past performance, which I can tell you would be very good. And then someone who can ride a bike, who can't necessarily cook, would pick it up, grab it and take it to whoever wants it in my local community. That could work, couldn't it? That's probably there we are. It's a better business model than Deliveroo. I'm going to list next week. Good for the planet as well, that approach, isn't it? Which is what we're going to talk about a lot today. Rishi Sunak has been proven wrong on 2 counts yesterday. First of all, he had said Deliveroo was a great British success story, given that the company started in London, and Will Shue, the founder, is from London originally. They took their first order in London. He's a big supporter of it. But, you know, it all went sadly wrong. But also, yesterday's listing was an example of a dual-class share structure, which is something that Lord Hill had recommended in a review to try and get more tech firms into the city. So you could invest, but for a limited time, the shares would be on a dual structure that would give more control to the founder or the majority shareholder. So, you wouldn't have to worry about investors getting too involved with those pesky things called voting rights. They'd still have some, but nowhere near as many as the ratio that you'd get. So you could still keep control. So maybe, just maybe yesterday, that Lord Hill was wrong on this. Part of the collapse could be because investors didn't like that idea, that they were putting money into something and not being able to determine what happens to the company that they ploughed money into. So maybe Lord Hill was wrong. Perhaps he's Lord over the hill. Is that a bit disrespectful? Well, I certainly hope so. Now, that feels like a natural segue, doesn't it? Talk about over the hill. Joe Biden. I don't think he is, but some people are saying he is because he's 78. The Daily Mail was making a big thing yesterday about how he gingerly walked up the stairs to Air Force One. Very nearly trips again, they say in block caps. When I am in charge of the world, there will be a quota on capitalized words in newspapers and in tweets. I don't think Donald Trump was aware that actually lowercase existed. He is, by the way, Donald Trump, very close to launching his own social media channel, which will be presumably just him, just a few months away. But anyway, let's listen to what Joe Biden had to say yesterday. A fairly rousing speech at the beginning while he still had a bit of energy.
This is not to target those who made it, not to seek retribution. This is about opening opportunities for everybody else. And here's the truth. We all will do better when we all do well. It's time to build our economy from the bottom up and from the middle out, not the top down. That hadn't worked very well. For the economy overall, it hadn't worked. Because Wall Street didn't build this country. You, great middle class, built this country. And unions built the middle class. And it's time, and this time, when we rebuild the middle class, we're going to bring everybody along. Regardless of your background, your color, your religion, no matter, everybody gets to come along. So today, I'm proposing a plan for the nation that rewards work, not just rewards wealth.
So he's going to be spending $2 trillion on infrastructure spending over 8 years, including $621 billion to modernize the transport infrastructure, $400 billion to help care for the aging and those with disabilities, $300 billion to, I'm not quite sure how that becomes infrastructure, but anyway, $300 billion to boost the manufacturing industry, $213 billion on retrofitting and building affordable housing, and $100 billion expanding broadband access, amongst other investments. And he says it's going to be paid for over 15 years by raising the corporate tax. He quite rightly pointed to the tax cuts that Donald Trump had introduced, which actually added $2 trillion to the national debt. Now, there was this idea, of course, it didn't show in the budget because there was this idea that this would create such enormous growth that the new jobs and tax receipts would counteract those tax cuts. They would more than cover it through the trickle-down effect. Do you remember that? It didn't work again, though. But let's keep trying till it does. Here's what he had to say, Joe Biden, yesterday about that $2 trillion.
Overwhelmingly, the benefits of that tax package went to the wealthiest Americans. It even included new investments that would profit by shifting profits and jobs overseas if you're a corporation. It was bad for American competitiveness, deeply unfair to the middle-class families, and wrong for our future. So here's what I do. I start with one rule. No one, we say it again, no one making under $400,000 will see their federal taxes go up, period. This is not about penalizing anyone. I have nothing against millionaires and billionaires. I believe American capitalism. I want everyone to do well. But here's the deal. Right now, a middle-class couple, a firefighter and a teacher, with 2 kids making a combined salary of, say, $110,000, $120,000 a year, pays 22 cents for each additional dollar they earn in federal income tax. But a multinational corporation that builds a factory abroad, brings it home and sells it, they pay nothing at all.
So he is going to charge companies a tax of 21% minimum on foreign income applied to the profits that are earned in other countries overseas, which is up from 10.5% today. I can see why he might want to do that, but I also wonder whether that means that those companies are not going to pay tax in those overseas countries, because America is very good at nabbing tax for overseas operations already, and from American citizens who happen to be living overseas. So my wife, for example, has to fill in an American tax return because she's an American citizen. She's never lived there. She just happens to have an American father, so she got an American passport. But anyway, I digress. For domestic business, he is putting the corporate tax up to 28% from 21%. It was 35% before Donald Trump came into office, and he reckons that's going to pay for it over a certain number of years. In the UK, of course, we've taken ours from 19%, our corporate tax, up to 25%. So why not go for parity with the United States? Why not get a whole load of countries together and say, yes, let's just make it 28%. We kept it smartly at 19% for small business. He might want to look at that as a good idea, but less smartly, we are trying to pull back on spending, whereas the US is pumping money into the economy because this is the important time to do it. The recovery phase. We've built that bridge to get people over the chasm that the economy has faced. But what about now, with lots of people out of work, lots of people wanting to save money, not necessarily spending? Many jobs have disappeared that will never return in retail, for example. This is the time for the public sector to step in. And infrastructure is the obvious focus because it creates jobs, because we're building big stuff, and it provides a leave behind as well. It's going to benefit, if it's done right, something that hopefully is going to aid productivity. But where is our infrastructure plan? Where is our future vision? Boris talked about levelling up, but where's the plan, Boris? I mean, the budget gave us continued furlough, extending an uplift in universal credit, all pretty small stuff, freezing tax thresholds, which really was just an exercise in trying to claw back some money. But it actually means many people are going to come out of the tax-free threshold, so actually it was hurting the poor. And then we've got free ports, which probably won't work. So where's the growth side of the equation? Rishi Sunak talked about help to grow. That was his answer, which means tens of thousands of small and medium-sized businesses will get a management training course, 90% paid for by the government. I suspect that not many will take it because they won't want to pay the 10% that they've got to pay because they don't think it's going to do them any good. So it's going to be a very interesting experiment, isn't it? One we're all going to be party to, sadly, as to which side of the Atlantic bounces back the fastest from COVID-19. The one that pump primes the economy with infrastructure spending, or the one that centered a restricted number of people on management training courses. I could laugh. The problem is you can't laugh and cry at the same time, can we? I mean, Rishi Sunak is supposedly our Prime Minister in waiting, which is that going to be any good for any of us? It's going to be very good for Savile Row, isn't it? The suit makers there. But Boris, I mean, he did talk about a green plan last year. But that seems to have not created a mention in the budget earlier this year. Meanwhile, while we wait for that green master plan, what can we all do to help the planet? I mean, more and more of us are concerned now because I think COVID-19 has been this wake-up call, hasn't it? We've got closer to nature, and so infections have spread. Now we're asking, what are we doing to the climate? You know, we can't ignore, even if you thought before, well, you know, it's all overblown. Now we've had David Attenborough telling us that we should be concerned about it. David Bellamy, remember him? I think he's a bit of a climate change denier. We can ignore him. But most of us now in Britain, at least, I think that climate change is real and we have to do our bit. But will we put our money where our mouth is? Do we, for example, ensure our pension is going to the right funds to help the right companies? Lucy Siegle is an environmental journalist. She's been looking at new research from online pension provider PensionBee that shows that 29% would change the companies their pension was investing in if they discovered how unsustainable they were. So that is actually getting a bit easier now, isn't it, though, Lucy? Because big oil companies aren't giving the returns that they used to give. So Royal Dutch Shell, for example, their share price is now only a little over half what it was a few years ago. So in a way, the decision is being made for us, isn't it? It's no longer profitable to not be green.
Well, you would think so, but there's such a disconnect between pensions and what people know about them that by the time that kind of information trickles through to the layperson who doesn't really know much about their pension, it's kind of too late. So it's about joining the dots. There is a whole kind of theory, of course, that let the market decide and all this stuff works itself out. In practice, I don't think it happens soon enough. And I think that lots and lots of people really would benefit from divesting their pension and understanding that the £3 trillion that UK pensions create, that fund, more often than not, is financing fossil fuel growth, and it's financing destruction of the Amazon, deforestation, and things like tobacco and the arms trade, where a lot of people's values do not sit. So there's kind of 2 points to this, really. There's the pragmatic point that you make, which is a very good one, about de-risking your pension. Well, there's 3 points, actually. There's also the kind of what I find incredibly exciting point. How are we going to finance this shift to net zero, this low carbon future? And we need to shift our funds, our investments, and particularly our pensions so that they're financing the future rather than the past. And then the third point is, do you want your values to align? You could work, and a lot of people take this very seriously now, you could work your whole career in something really woke, to use that word, and then what's your plan for your pension? To have it paid, have your retirement paid by fossil fuels. That's not going to sit well with a lot of people.
Yeah.
So all of these things add up to taking a better interest in what happens to your pension and using the new products that are becoming available, which make that much easier.
Right. But you know what, Lucy, it does sound like it takes a lot of time. So for a lot of people, and I'm partially guilty of this, I haven't got a clue what's sitting in my pension fund, I have to say.
You don't?
No.
You're joking.
Well, I've got two pension funds. I've got a few pension funds, actually. So I'm doing my own thing. But then I've also got a managed fund. And I get reports on what they're doing, and it gives me quite a good return. But for my own, so I play with the rest of my money. And so I do know what I'm doing there. But I think for a lot of people, it's hard work, isn't it? You've got to actually, first of all, to know what companies are doing, know which companies you're going to pick on and which ones are the bad guys, and then knowing what your pension fund is doing. I'm sure for a lot of people, they're going, ooh, I'd rather not know because I might find something that I don't want to find out about.
Well, I think it used to be the case that even if you did want to know, it was rather difficult to find out. I remember working for a particular newspaper group with very strong ethical, environmental ethos. And one of my colleagues saying, hey, what happens to our pensions? And after about 4 weeks, by which she looked like, she'd run about 49 marathons, she said, this is not good. This is not good news. So the divestment movement, moving from funding fossil fuels, moving it into funding renewables, which is essentially what's happening, is a global movement, and it's taking shape really, really fast. It's been enormously successful. And now it's relatively easy to go to a website and type in, use their digital tools to find out where your pension sits and lobby that pension provider to find out more information and shift your pension product if you need to. It is becoming easier. And one of the reasons it's becoming easier because Pension B, for example, Legal in General and Pension B have launched a fossil fuel free fund.
Right.
And, these funds now exist and are now coming into the marketplace, which makes it much, much easier.
But to my earlier point, it goes way beyond fossil fuels, of course. We could be food companies, for example, if they practice unsustainable practices. Airlines, where do we draw the line? But also, so have a go at that one in a second. But also, my earlier point, oil companies are not fashionable now because they're not giving the returns, and the growth is in green energy. I take your point. There's perhaps a bit of a lag effect, and we want it to happen sooner, but it is moving that way anyway.
Yeah, well, good. Let's get aboard the train. I'll take whatever motivation is there. Honestly, I really don't care.
As long as it's not a diesel train. Yeah.
Yeah, and an electrified train. It's really I think it's really important to be part of the future, not the past, as I keep saying. And, this is all to do, in a sense, isn't it? It's all to do with timings. So we've got all these different horizons. We've got net zero horizon, which we're very focused on in the UK. The UK was the first to enshrine a net zero goal into law. And then we've obviously got COP26 happening in November. So people are really starting to think about how do we hit these goals at the right time? Personal carbon calculators have become really, really popular. There's loads of them about. And one of the ways that you can cut your own giant carbon footprint, and I'm not just talking to you, I'm talking to all of us, Phil, because in the UK we have a
I'm not taking this as a personal affront.
Good. I don't want to alienate you. And one of the easiest ways of doing this is to divest your pension from fossil fuel and move it into a sustainable fund, an ESG fund, a renewable fund. So that's a really, really quick win. Yeah. And the point is that these goals are important, and they are, if you have a nationally aggregated goals, we need to make choices. Like, do you want to not be able to drive your car or not be able to take that flight because your local authority decided to back a really high carbon footprint? Because that's the reality of how we move towards net zero. And do you want to forsake something because your pension plan was funding fossil fuels? It's all to do with the carbon calculation. So cut where you can, pull every lever, push every button. And I think that this is a really easy thing to do.
So what you're saying, that if you don't do that, then it might come back to bite you, because we may find as if we want to keep that goal, we're going to have to we're going to have to be more stringent in regulations in the future, which might find that your life is impeded in more ways. But okay, getting back to my question that was lost within a question. I sometimes do that.
Yes, I do that.
The food companies, if they're unsustainable, we've seen, I think one of the things about the problem that we saw in the Suez was the realization of just how many of these massive container vessels there are floating around the world. And I read somewhere that 15 or 20 of those vessels basically creates as much pollution as all the cars on the planet. I don't know whether that's right or not, but anyway, it gives us the scale of it. So where do we draw the line? I mean, do we say, well, okay, we're not going to invest in companies that are shipping goods around the world, for example? Do we buy local and only eat local food? I mean, there's a point where it doesn't become realistic, I guess.
Well, I think what is realistic. So what's been exposed by the ever given, the trapped ever given, is really the follies of the just-in-time supply chain and how fragile that can be, actually, and how international trade carries a lot of risk. Part of that risk is a carbon risk, as you talk about, and the whether or not to bring aviation and shipping into carbon management has been a really vexed question for a large number of years for policymakers and, things like the Paris Agreement and stuff like that. What's been useful in the last few days is how normal people are seeing how globalized trade, the impact of globalized trade. And this is something that people like me, journalists like me, have been trying to sort of talk about for like 20 years. And the Ever Given has just managed to achieve it in like 6 days. And it's about risk, isn't it? It's about connecting with the incredibly troubling existential question of our survival on the planet. We are in the midst of two crises, a nature crisis, sometimes called a biodiversity crisis, and we are in the midst of a climate crisis. Those two things cannot be ignored. We all have a vested interest in solving those and pushing for solutions. And this comes back to the very idea of what I'm talking about, which is to pull every lever and push every button. Lots of people make the point these are structural issues. So whether or not you eat, chickpeas in your own life really doesn't have much bearing on those structural issues. But I would argue when it comes to personal finance, this is a very clear place where the dots join up. Yeah. So that you are changing, you're helping to change a structure. And I don't think it's just about feeling good. I think it's about, let's be real about the risks of continuing business as usual, because I suppose whatever given shows us that's business as usual. So of course, then you start looking at other ways of doing things, and offshoring and onshoring, i.e. whether you eat local, whether you buy local, whether there's more local production, is all part of that conversation. But we obviously need to do things a little bit differently.
But I wonder how much difference you're going to make by changing pension funds, because shares obviously are traded on the secondary market. So if I buy shares in an oil company, I'm not making the oil company richer. I mean, the damage has already been done. I'll be making a few oil executives richer, perhaps. But it's really those new investments that we want to see, isn't it? It's the IPOs, or even, not listed companies, those first-time investments in greener companies that are going to make the difference. I'm not sure how. I mean, it would be great if there was a way of getting that into pension funds. But, a lot of the time, these funds are based on trading existing shares. The secondary market really doesn't have as big an influence as putting money into first-time investments to grow new categories. You grow those new categories like green energy, and obviously then you are going to have a flow-on effect on the profits of those other companies, which is what we'd like to see. But changing share prices is sort of like a minuscule difference to all of that, isn't it?
I take your point, but it has to add up. It has to be. You can't. The complexity of saying we're dealing with this, we're not dealing with this. It just doesn't work. We've got to. It's almost like getting match fit. Like the whole team has got to be ready. All of the products have got to be there. The whole space needs to shift. It needs to be uniform.
Yeah.
We can't be telling one narrative about risk and fossil fuel for one part of the market and not for another. It has to follow on.
And
That's what I feel.
Yeah. And look, I am loving your enthusiasm, by the way, for all of this.
Oh, good.
And you're making me feel guilty that I'm not paying as much attention as I should be. But not just in shares. I mean, there's also when we go shopping as well. And this is the question, isn't it? Do you think attitudes are changing that much? Because if there was the choice between buying something which hadn't been shipped around the world, which was more expensive, and buying something that had sat on one of those massive container vessels and was cheaper, but it polluted the planet in the process, I wonder how many people would still take the cheaper option. We do shop on price, most of us, don't we?
Yeah, and some people need to shop on price because they're on very limited income or low income. And some people live beyond their means. Looking at myself. So, there are lots of different factors at play. And I would rather, it didn't come down to putting all the pressure on consumer shoulders so that you have to make these terrifying decisions in the supermarket. Do I wreck the planet or do I do this? It's not fair. And that's why I want more shared responsibility. I want more structural responsibility, more policy responsibility. But those questions are really kind of loaded, aren't they? And it's like really what you want to give people access to stuff that's good for them, first of all. So first and foremost, you want people to have access to fresh, healthy food, which is nutritionally valid. And that is often, I think there's lots of research to show this, from, a more local environment. You want to give people access to clothes, to fashion. I've done a lot of work in the fashion industry that is going to be durable, that is not going to need to be thrown away because it's bad quality. So it's about like giving people access to dignified products that they deserve and that they are helpful to them in their lives. So there is a whole kind of orientation, a change, a shift that needs to occur there as well, because the way that cheap products are often brought to market, particularly in fast food, fashion and tech, they externalize so much of the cost and so much of the impact that you end up paying for it in different ways. And they're often not very good value. We need a whole reassessment of what value means.
Yeah.
And I think that's true as in products such as pensions, as it is in shoes and trainers. I mean, I really think we need to sort of go back to basics, if that makes sense, and assess what we mean by value.
Well, maybe maybe there are new production processes which are going to enable us to create stuff closer to market, and that is going to be beneficial. But then, of course, the flow-on effects are there's going to be a lot of countries that are reliant on our trade as well.
We can also make container ships greener, by the way.
That would be a good move, wouldn't it? I don't think that technology has moved on at all, I think. So a couple of quick questions for you then to finish off with. First of all, is Boris doing well on all of this, do you think? I mean, no petrol vehicles in a decade. We're getting more wind farms being shipped out of Teesside. Is he on the right track? And the second question, which I'll throw in together, because I do that just to confuse you. COVID-19, has it been a step forward or a step backwards? I mean, we're sending parcels everywhere. We've got more packaging. Perhaps we have learned bad behaviours. Or is it overall good because we have become aware that this is a crisis and there's another one looming?
I think both on both of those issues, the jury is out. I would say, I tell you what troubles me about Boris and the rhetoric around not just green stuff, but that's where I live, as it were. It's this idea we need to be the Saudi Arabia of wind power. Like, why can't we be the Bhutan of plastics? That's what I say, because Bhutan banned plastics. Why is it always the boosterism, always the big? And some of this is about actually being small and thinking differently about resources. A lot of that stuff is about unproven technologies, which is exciting if you understand the minutiae of how hydrogen is going to work or carbon capture storage. But a lot of it to me just seems untested and unproven. And I think that we need to really focus on how we bring everyone into this conversation. It's about justice, environmental justice. I also thought the climate assembly that was held got interrupted by COVID, unfortunately, so it went online. I thought that was a really super interesting democratic experiment, and I think there's a lot of clues as to what we'll do in that report from the Climate Assembly. 100 citizens from the UK formed that. No knowledge of climate before. And the other point about COVID, we are now at a crossroads. We've got G7 happening in Cornwall. We have to impress upon those leaders that these $1 trillion, reboosting packages. Help me, Phil. What's
stimulus?
The word? Thank you. Yeah. Stimulus packages.
I was thinking, former Guardian journalist, I thought, your knowledge of the language would be far greater than mine. I was expecting something
No, my God, you must be
that.
joking. No, the Guardian shunned my terrible grasping for words. Anyway, so the stimulus packages, you've heard this, we've got 10 years to solve climate change.
Yeah.
Because of the size of the stimulus packages and because of COVID-19, that has shrunk to like 18 months. Because if those go the wrong way, if those invest in fossil fuel capacity and they don't go towards renewables, then we have a very, very serious issue.
Right. Well,
it's all about the numbers. It's all about the numbers.
It is. Okay. And we get the message. We should start with our pension fund.
Yes. Can I just make one extra point?
Yes.
MakeMyMoneyMatter.co.uk is a fabulous campaign. I think it was co-founded by Richard Curtis, actually. Right. But that's a really good website. And the digital tools on there are very clear and simple as well as pensionbee.com.
Great talking to you, Lucy. I hope we can get you on again.
I'd love that.
We'll try.
I'll learn some words.
We'll that's right. Work on your vocabulary for next time. Absolutely.
I'll try.
Good to talk, Lucy. See you soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
And normally we finish by having a quick look at this morning's newspapers. We don't really have time to do that today, but look, there's nothing terribly exciting jumping out of the front pages. The Daily Express is saying, at last, victims of crime put first, with sweeping changes to the justice system today. Most of the other papers are actually about the race review, and some of the wordage in it has got people upset. Starmer, vaccine passports un-British, the front page of the Daily Telegraph. I'm now doing what I said I wasn't going to do, which is give you a quick look at the newspapers. So maybe we'll leave it there. No, Deliveroo, front page of the Financial Times. We've covered that, of course. It was a damp squid, wasn't it? That's it for today and for the week. Have a great Easter. Back on Tuesday morning. See you then.
It's the Business with Phil Dobbie. Listen online at itsthe.business or wherever good